Good evening and welcome to the March 26, 2009 meeting of the Radnor Township Environmental Advisory Council. We appreciate your being here tonight. Just wanted to remind everybody that we are now targeting 6 o'clock as the start time for the EAC meetings. They had previously been held at 6:30, but we've moved them a little bit earlier. So for folks that are keeping track of that, just bump it up a half an hour on your calendar. Before we get to the first item on the review and approval of the minutes on the agenda, we have a couple of introductions to make. We have a few new faces with us here tonight. I first want to introduce Josh Hilbert, who is our newest EAC member. He's an environmental consultant and has been practicing in the environmental area for about 10 years or more. And if you want to say a few words about yourself, briefly.
Thanks for the introduction. I was born and raised in Newtown, Bucks County, and moved to this area about 3 years ago with my wife. We have since had 2 kids, 4 and 2. And as you said, I've been in the environmental field for about 10 years. I've worked for an environmental consulting firm for that time, and then for the past 3 years or so, I've owned that consulting firm. And we do work in the energy management and pollution prevention field. So I'm looking forward to being part of my hometown's efforts to work on those matters, and I'll talk a little bit more about something I've been working on as a volunteer on a volunteer basis in a little bit.
Excellent.
But thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
I just wanted to add that Josh has been very impressive. I think you've actually contributed quite a bit already, even before you've been a member, so thank you for your pre-existing help.
Josh has been working very hard on the emissions inventory that we've been undertaking for Radnor Township, and he'll give us all an update on that a little bit later in the program. Thanks. And I also want to introduce Julia Hurl down here at the end. Julia is a member of the Radnor Township Planning Commission, and she is our official EAC liaison, so thank you for coming and joining us tonight, Julia. Thank you. Okay, great. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to run through the agenda, although we do have a special guest here with us tonight, Diana Miser, who's going to give a presentation on composting. And we want to start with that presentation by around 6:30, 6:45. So we're going to try to take care of some business, but if our business ends up taking too long, I may just kind of cut us off to insert her because she has some other appointments this evening. Okay? So let's get started with the review and approval of the minutes. The minutes of the February 26, 2009 meeting were previously distributed. Does anyone have any corrections to the minutes, changes? No? Do I have a motion to approve? Second?
Seconded.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So approved. Thank you. Next, we're going to go to the announcements, and I have a pretty long list of announcements, and I just want to work our way through them. And some of these things that we're announcing, we may talk a little bit more about in our work group reports, but at least I want to provide all of the dates and times and things like that in one shot. So for those of you interested, you might want to get your pens out, and we'll run through them.
And these will also be in the minutes, which will be posted
That's right.
tomorrow, so anyone watching
right.
or listening, you could.
Right, and almost all of them are already on the website. So if you're looking for them and you didn't get something, you can go to the Radnor website and you ought to be able to find them as well. The first item is Radnor is going to be having a yard waste, a curbside collection, and that will be taking place from March 23rd through April 3rd, where they'll be collecting shrubbery, trimmings, clippings, that sort of thing, need to be tied up in manageable bundles or put into biodegradable bags. They specify no grass clippings and no plastic bags. And actually, a little bit later on, Heather's going to provide some additional information about the importance of taking advantage of this opportunity, and likewise Diana will be giving us information on composting. So, but if you're looking for the township to take away some of these things, that's the time frame. Actually, Heather, did you have any particulars on schedule for pickups? Were you able to get that?
Oh, yes, for the curbside, as some of you may know, this has only been going on a couple of years in Radnor through a grant program. But ideally, they would have during this week and next week. So really, we're talking about next week at this point. Ideally, you would set your things out on garbage day or before, and if you do have something in a trash receptacle, as they describe on the website, just make sure it's clear that it's just yard waste. What they really hate getting is something with a lot of sticks at the top that they go to dump in there halfway, and then the bottom half is, trash, like plastic bags and other things. So if you put it out on trash day, they do differentiate between your garbage and that, but you can put it in the same spot on your at your curb. If they happen to come back to your house to get your cans, please leave it at the curb. But they have 2 trucks running the route, and so if they can, they'll get it at the same time as your garbage. But if it still sits there, don't be discouraged. They're coming back later on in the week. So, for example, you're either Monday or Tuesday next week. So if you put it out on Monday and it's still there Tuesday morning, just leave it there, and they will be coming by to get it.
Great, thank you. The next is a household hazardous waste collection event, and that'll be held this Saturday, March 28th, from 9 to 3 at the Marple Transfer Station in Broomall. And it's a good opportunity to get rid of old chemicals if you're doing spring cleaning. They'll be taking things like oil-based paints, paint thinner, kerosene, motor oil, gasoline. You can look, if you go to the Radnor Township website, there's a whole list of the types of things that they will take, but it's mostly old chemicals and things like that you hopefully wouldn't be throwing in your trash can anyway, mercury-containing items.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
I mean, if you can find that through residents, and then if you look underneath trash and recycling, you'll get there. And it also has directions. I know sometimes you hear Marple and you think, gosh, I could never get there. So on the Radnor website, there are directions you can click on to get there, if that makes it that much easier.
Very good. And then there will be a second one in April, on April 25th, and it'll be a different location. So again, the importance of looking for the directions. And the one for April 25th will be held in Darby at the Emergency Services Training Center. And that one, they'll also be taking computers, scanners, printers, portable TVs, and fax machines, although they do have some limitations on how many they will take. But if you have that sort of material that you're looking to recycle, if you wait till April, you'll have an opportunity to do that as well. Sloan, did you have something on that?
Yeah. Televisions?
Televisions,
Is
yes.
that the second?
TVs, however, they will not take TVs in wooden consoles or TVs over 27 inches. So there are some limitations.
Or do you take a very big one?
I don't know, but I did see on some website today that Staples is having some particular Earth Day program where they're taking a bunch of things on Earth Day only. I'm not sure that it would be TVs, but
Okay.
it might.
Maybe.
If you get out there on the web, I think a lot of people are focusing on Earth Day to try to take some of these things in, so it might be worth
Right, thanks.
checking on that. Spring cleanup is scheduled for Saturday, March 28th from 9 to 1 at Clem McCrone Park. Clearing brush, that sort of thing. Love to have folks come out and help with that. So there's more information on the Radnor Township website with regard to that. And then a couple of announcements regarding upcoming EAC meetings. At our next EAC meeting, which will be on April 23rd, we're going to have a few presentations on recycling and waste in Radnor Township. So some of you may have seen an article in the local paper about increased costs that Radnor needs to pay for getting rid of waste, for recycling, and there was a lot of information in there about costs and what we do. And so what we're going to do on April 23rd is we're going to have Amy Cuthbertson here, our finance director, who will talk a little bit about all the costs involved with waste disposal and with recycling. And we're also going to have Bill Hagan, who is Public Works Manager, talk about sort of the practical dynamics of what's collected and how it's collected. And in addition, Heather will give a presentation on household waste reduction, because one of the ways that we can save money in Radnor Township is by generating less waste, and including less recycling. So if we can reduce the amount of waste, then hopefully we can all reduce the cost that the township needs to pay for this and, reduce all the expenses. So we're looking forward to Heather's presentation on April 23rd.
Right. Which will also include what Diana's going to talk about with composting.
Right, great.
And we'll get there.
Thank you. And then following that, in May, we are going to have a presentation on rain barrels. Dan Malloy, the township engineer, has actually rain barrels at his house, and a lot of us have had questions about, well, how does it work, practical things about it. So he'll make a presentation on that. And then also we will have a presentation on some stormwater issues. Brian McCarthy, who is assistant engineer for the township, is very experienced in a lot of stormwater issues, and he'll be presenting on that as well. So some things to look forward to in May. In addition, I just want to announce the Sustainability Series program that we had talked about previously on alternative energy, which was scheduled for May 19th. We may end up be changing that to May 18th, which would be the Monday, because there may be a conflict with the use of this room. So it's not settled, but for anyone that had marked it down for May 19th, we may need to bump it ahead. Robin, were you at that meeting?
I was thinking that there were two different dates they were looking at. There were two different dates they were looking at, but that may be where they ended up.
Okay, right. So we need to make sure that all the speakers can move one day ahead, but because it's election day, I think they use this room for voting.
Is that during the day, or is that?
No, it'll be an evening program, like we
okay.
did with the Green Building Forum, probably 7 o'clock at night.
Right.
Okay. And then one other announcement, and Heather, this was something that you had brought to our attention, which is this Lights Out for Earth Hour on March 29th from 8:30 to 10:30. So I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that.
This is something that's a national, actually it's a worldwide effort in having people for 1 hour turn off their lights. I believe it's on Saturday night. Is it the 29th? I thought
It's
it was
the
the
20
28th. I believe it's March 28th.
Okay.
Is that a nod? Yes. It's
Yeah.
March 28th, which is a Saturday night. It's a great thing if you have kids or whatever. Just turn the lights out for an hour. You don't have to, they'll probably just read by television or something. But but the idea is to have this,
Lights can be out, but TV can be on?
Well, no. You are free to interpret lights out, as you wish.
Okay.
But I think it's just to bring awareness to, one, how many lights we have on and what life is like that, without it.
Okay.
That we need to conserve it.
Okay. So that was my long list of announcements. Does anyone have
And if you just
oh.
Google that, you can go, there's websites, and you can read more about it.
And actually, DEP just issued a press release about 5 o'clock this afternoon encouraging it, but I didn't have a chance to actually read their press release. But you can get on the PA DEP website, and they'll have information
And
about it.
it's taken on, like in places like Australia and Europe. I mean, there are cities that have taken it on, and countries. So it's kind of like Earth Day when it started. I wouldn't be surprised if each year it kind of builds and becomes a larger and larger event. So you could look back and say, I turned my lights out in 2009, long before anyone even started doing this.
Are there any other announcements? No? Okay, very good. So let's move then to the rain garden project. Anne, do you have an update on that?
Yes, let me give you an update. There's been quite a lot going on. Brian McCarthy from the township has been moving this along nicely. He has been in communication with Mara Baird, who's the landscape architect who works with the township on a regular basis. So we have a list of proposed plants. And what we're asking Watershed to do, because Watersheds continue to be interested in being involved, is to cross-check that list against the plants that were used in the rain garden at the middle school to see which of them seem to be thriving at the middle school, and if any of the plants on this list were planted there and have died. If some have, then we'll keep them off the list for this rain project. The township conducted a percolation test on the soil, and the news from that was good. The soil percolates appropriately, so there doesn't have to be any exceptional measure. And of course, the township has been planning for quite some time now that they will do the excavation, and they'll bring over the compost from Skunk Hollow, and then we're hoping that Watershed, and we'll be reaching out probably for other volunteers, will help spread the compost in the site, which is just across the street from the township building. We're going to have to go out and look for donations for the various plants. There isn't a township budget for this, so we'll be gearing up to do that shortly. And then when we have the plants, we'll also be looking for volunteers to help with the actual planting effort. So we're moving ahead.
And actually, if anybody is watching this and wants to make a donation, they should contact us either through Melissa Kahn at the township or perhaps directly to Brian McCarthy. That would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And Anne, if you'd like, tomorrow at Swarthmore at the Scott Arboretum, they are having this workshop on rain gardens. It is sold out, so don't go running there, but they do have a lot of experience with rain gardens. And they also have a plant sale in the spring, but I can contact them because a lot of these plants, if they are thriving, dividing some of them off is feasible. So they may, if you wanted, I could even show them the plant list because it's not only Watershed's one experience, but they are kind of the experts in the area. In fact, this was a conference that had a fee, and because they're doing this as a part of the sustainability series, they have made it free to the public, which I think is part of why it sold out. But they have really been in the forefront, and they're only, 15 miles away.
Right.
So I think
that would be great.
I mean, they're in the same zone as
Sure.
us. So I'll do that.
Very good, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the work group reports. We'll try to get through a couple of them before breaking for our presentation on composting. The first one is the stormwater program and funding. I just have a very brief update to let folks know that a focus group was formed of some township folks that are interested in stormwater, impacted by stormwater, to talk a little bit more about this comprehensive stormwater program that we've been evaluating. And they're planning to have the group meet perhaps a couple of more times before this goes back to the Board of Commissioners for them to decide whether they want the township to move forward with a feasibility study or not on development of a comprehensive stormwater program that would be supported by some type of funding mechanism. Okay. Moving into the climate protection ICLEI audit, we have an update on that from Josh Hilbert.
Okay, thanks. I may have passed out the wrong sheets to you. You should have one packet that's stapled of about 5 pages, and then a single sheet that at the top says government greenhouse gas emissions in 2005 report by source. So if you don't have that single page, I'm going to pass around these so you can take a look at that. Well, to summarize to date, what I have done and what my predecessor, Christina from Villanova Law, right, what she volunteered to do, we volunteered to take raw data regarding the energy that Radnor Township government has used in 2005 and enter it into a software program that was developed by ICLEI, which is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. And what that software is designed to do is to guide or to inventory greenhouse gas emissions from a township, for instance, our township, split into 2 sectors: the government sector and the residential sector, or the community. So, as part of this project, we just focused on the government, and we're not worried about the community right now. So, that raw data comes in different forms. In our case, it came in from PICO bills, which tell you how much electricity and how much natural gas that the township purchased in 2005. It also comes from the our waste stream data. So, for instance, the amount of trash that was disposed by the trash trucks that the Radnor Township has, that waste, incidentally, was incinerated and thereby produced carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. It also includes the amount of diesel fuel and gasoline fuel that Radnor Township purchased in 2005. That fuel was used in a variety of different vehicles, but primarily was used in the heavy equipment trucks that Radnor Township uses in the Public Works Department, and which trash trucks and that kind of stuff. But it also, in our case, we've included the school district vehicles. So it also was used in school buses and maintenance equipment for the school. One other sector is the water and sewage sector. That is a very small component of this, but that's the greenhouse gases that were emitted from the electric it took for Radnor to pump its waste around to where it needed to go. So, last week we substantially completed this data entry, and I believe that we're pretty close to having a pretty good understanding of where our greenhouse gas emissions come from. And I think at this time, it might be appropriate to, after you've reviewed the report, and by the way, I have extra copies for anybody out here that wants to see some copies. It might be appropriate to take a step back and look at the data that we have and maybe talk to some people at the township to make sure that we're not missing any large components of Radnor's greenhouse gas producing equipment or buildings or whatnot.
I think it makes good sense to do a little bit of a reality check and make sure we've got all that.
Can I just make a note, just for those who may be watching, the whole purpose for this inventory is in order to enable Radnor to proceed to make some plans to reduce our carbon footprint for public purposes through, our government operations. And so the commissioners now, 2 years ago, made a commitment, pledged that Radnor would undertake a carbon emissions reduction plan. And so all the work that Josh has done and Christina previously is giving us that baseline from which we can then set some goals that, will develop a climate action plan. And the software that Josh has been using is going to enable us to take a look at what is the effect of reductions in one of these types of energy uses or another. Where is the cost-effective next step and that kind of thing. And so it's all part of getting there. So it's a huge project that Josh has just completed, which is really the step one that we well, not completed, but the huge data entry piece. And then I think we'll be talking about developing a report that kind of puts, describes the data and what.
Right. It would be great to have the highlights, that we can have a group to get together and identify the highlights, one as a baseline. But also what's nice about this, what we're doing in the schools, is having the kids track things they can do, and they're getting equivalents for pounds of carbon that they save with this. So this might give them a context, like I'm looking, if Wayne Elementary School consumes 855,000 tons, they might be completely discouraged and not turn on the lights at home. But it gives them a context for just the concept of pounds. For me, pounds of carbon is hard. But, for them, their little nimble minds, it'll be nice to be able to, behind that effort, compare how their school is doing.
Right, and some of our surrounding communities, like Haverford Township, have completed emissions inventory already, and so there are templates that we can use, because I think it does make sense that we, develop it into a report with some text interpreting the numbers. So that will be the next step. Once we're confident, you've talking with Matt Bauman, who's been involved in this, to make sure that we've got everything. And once we're sure we've got everything, to develop it and explain what all the numbers mean. Yeah,
and it would be nice to have I assume there'll be different iterations of the report, but it would be nice to have a really simplistic report that, like a 2-page, just something that a very basic, someone doesn't have to be committed to sitting down with the report for 20 minutes or have a high school education. Like, it'd be nice to have a very pithy.
Agreed.
Pictures.
Right.
No, it can be all words, but it should just be
but it's actually the Haverford's report has a lot of pie charts and stuff like that to give you a sense of scale.
Right, or a nice, piece of text with a pie chart. Like here's the finding and here's how we got there, instead of
I would just like to say I think this is a very exciting moment, really, and accomplishment. I know, Robin, you were very involved and spearheaded it. Josh, this is terrific, and I hope as we move forward, get the report together. I hope that this, we can get this out to the community and let people sort of see just the information. I think the information itself is very interesting, as well as some of the direction that we might want to go from here. So this is really quite an accomplishment.
Right, and in terms of getting the information out, Josh, we've been coordinating with the Radnor League of Women Voters and the Radnor Conservancy on the sustainability series. And one of the things that we wanted to do once this was completed was to actually have a program on, carbon footprinting and roll this out at that time. So later in the year, we can, give it all some context.
I said that we'd be ready by September for
September of 2009?
yeah. Well, I figured we needed a deadline.
Absolutely.
There goes your summary.
One of the interesting things, I know there are lots of interesting things we can do with this. One might be to look at how it breaks out versus other towns in the area. And I'm sure there are lots of other interesting benchmarks we can look at, but I think this is a really huge first step. So
Thank you for
Great.
all your hard work.
Great.
We really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
I would just suggest that maybe an executive summary, a couple pages to sort of give us the flavor and the big things that you've seen.
Can I take a minute to just tell you a quick executive summary of this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just focus on the single-page report that I gave you. It's quite interesting. It has 4 different columns. Well, let's say 5 different columns. On the far left, it'll tell you what component of or what sector we're talking about. So there's vehicles and buildings and whatnot. But if you focus on just the building sector, which is the top sector, there are 4 columns that come to the right of that. The tons of CO2 emitted from that source or that sector, the percentage of the township's CO2 that represents, the energy in millions of BTUs that sector consumed. That includes electricity and natural gas and oil. And then the cost of that energy. So if we just focus on the building sector, you'll see that buildings, and this data will be more informative when you compare it to another year. But if you'd like to say that, okay, buildings approximately emitted 4,875 tons of CO2, and that's in the energy that they consumed primarily, which represents about a third of the township's greenhouse gas emissions from buildings, that is. That energy is about 40 million BTUs of electricity, gas, and oil at a cost of about $1 million. So you can see right off the bat that the buildings, the vehicles that we have, the street lights that we use, and the waste that we produce are all fairly big components of our greenhouse gas emissions, whereas the water and the sewage sector is fairly minor.
Right, so for example, you have the streetlights are about 25% of the consumption. It would make any proposals for more efficient streetlights,
We need to look at that. Didn't we already convert to LED lights?
Yes, we did. So we don't really reflect the cost savings that have already occurred there, because a lot of that had happened prior to 2005.
So these are with LED lights.
Josh?
So some of the things that I think we had talked about before we initiated this were things that happened in prior years that we should sort of get a collection of information about things that have been done already. Mm-hmm. So if converting to the LED lights is the way to go to save on energy, if that's already done, we ought to have that identified somewhere, for example, in the report. So those are things I think, again, we should talk with Matt Bauman about and try to get a collection of those initiatives.
Josh, how did you handle the energy mix that PECO uses to generate electricity?
For instance, the different types of power plants that they
How
have.
they use
Yes,
wind
because
energy.
they bought nuclear power plants about 3 years ago, and precisely, I think, for the business model of keeping down carbon dioxide emissions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's changed dramatically.
Sure. In the software, when you discuss or when you disseminate or enter details about the electricity accounts that you have, you can describe at what's the component or what types of generation components go into that 100% of electricity that you use. So there are models or there are baseline mixes that PECO can give you for certain areas, or I'm sorry, not PECO. You can get this from PJM, I think, and they'll tell you that, okay, you have 80% from coal and 15% from natural gas, 5% from nuclear power, and that you just enter that once in this program, and then the program has emission factors for those power plants, and then it generates a CO2 number from those emission factors.
And the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, for their, region-wide inventory, they also have, they've come up with a figure for the energy mix in the region. So we should just see how that compares.
And I think actually that's another good point that we should make. Josh indicated that what he was doing was looking at all of the information for the township and not the community, but the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission recently came out. They had done an inventory, and that takes into account all of the community, so we're relying on being able to use some of that. Okay, great.
Is there any realistic way of doing an audit for residential?
The best that we can do, from what I know to this date, is this Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission report. They've done quite a comprehensive analysis and taken several years, I suppose, to put this together. That does include the analyses of residential sectors, and from the little I know, I've seen the report, and from the little I've seen of it, it does appear that we're going to be able to take that and generate data for Radnor Township's residential component without having to do any real analysis of our own.
Mm-hmm.
Robin,
Now,
you do?
Haverford Township did inventory residential as well, but they took PECO's figures for the community, and then they took estimates of vehicle miles traveled, in Haverford, and I forget how they did it. Somehow they figured how many trips were generated, and they divided it depending on, who was responsible for the trip, kind of thing. But it's a pretty rough measure. But so you're looking at an order of magnitude, but that can be useful too, because you can sort of set some kind of a vehicle miles traveled reduction goal and that kind of thing.
I think the point is that, we're trying to get a good sense of what our emissions are, but Josh, you do this for a living. It doesn't have to be exact. It just needs to be a starting point, and then as long as we're consistent with whatever assumptions we use on the baseline, we can use those assumptions going forward so that we can see if we're making progress.
And the software has gives you the ability to enter lots of notes on where you got your data from and how it was arrived at, so that the next person that does the report or the analysis, say in 2010 or whatever frequency you want to do it, can see what we assumed and use those same assumptions going forward, making the comparison more legitimate and more informative.
Right. Well, thank you very much for all of this hard work, and look forward to taking the next steps with you and Robin. So I'm going to cut off the work group reports right now so that we can turn to Diana Miser's presentation. And thank you for coming here tonight, Diana. Diana is, she has a concession at the farmer's market and has been promoting composting at the farmer's market. They don't yet have a program established there, but Diana is leading the initiative, and she is a master composter. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that as well in your presentation. Thank you for coming tonight.
Sure.
Oh, yes, well, this was the result of a class I just finished at the Chester County Solid Waste Authority presentation for master composting, and got me off and running with this project of trying to introduce and engage people in composting. Tonight, this presentation, which is from the Chester County Solid Waste Authority, is a PowerPoint presentation that has more information than we can really cover. So I've selected parts of it to help give an overview and give enough information to get you started. There is one caveat, though, before I begin, and it's a warning that whether composting, whether it's outdoor in a bin or indoor in a vermiculture, can be addictive. People who start have a very difficult time stopping, not that they want to, but it is to their benefit to continue. And I'm very happy to be here to present information about composting. We save money by composting. It requires us to use less fertilizer and less water in our gardens. It requires less space in the landfill. If we can take those clippings and leaves and shrubbery and convert them into compost, we can prevent methane gas buildup in our landfills, which then affects the air quality. So there are lots of real pluses around composting. Plus, it improves the quality of the soil in our yards. Tonight I'm going to speak about outdoor composting. It is, see if this is a little unfamiliar. Ooh, unfamiliar. Am I feedbacking here? No?
Are you
I'm
trying to
unfamiliar in how this all works, so please bear with me a moment. To make compost, we need 4 basic elements. We need brown, which is dried leaves, shrubbery, brush, combined with nitrogen, or the green clippings, cuttings, or food waste from our kitchens, along with water and air, or H2O, oxygen, excuse me. That creates a culture for the decomposers to be active and to create the compost. The decomposers are microbes like bacteria and fungus that actually do the work. All we have to do is add the food, make sure there's a lot of air and some water, and they will produce the heat that speeds up the process. It's very easy to compost. You can just allot a spot as small as 1 cubic yard in your back garden area. You can dump your leaves and your grass clippings there and let it be, and you'll be surprised how it disappears. It just vanishes. Or what I tend to do is a more moderate process, which is to add to that food waste and do some turning, and maybe actually I kind of let the rain add the water to it. But I keep monitor by turning it occasionally to make sure it has a lot of air, because that's what really keeps it from getting smelly. Or you can even go even more detailed with it and buy a thermometer and monitor the amount of water it gets. And a lot of people do take this to a higher science, but you don't have to. It can be very simple to just start the process and let it go on its own. Let's see here. This slide pretty much goes over what I just said, which is to establish a bin where you control the air, the water, the food, and the temperature. And you can manage the process and speed it up with a little attention. The benefits to compost are many. It supplies organic material to the soil, attracts earthworms, stimulates beneficial soil microorganisms in your earth, makes them happier, and they do more work. It's a healthful environment. It increases the soil water holding capacity, so things don't dry out as easily in the hot, dry weather. And it also increases soil nutrient retention. It promotes soil health by making the soil looser, easier to turn. Your roots can grow, the roots of the plants can grow to their maximum, to their optimal potential. If you have a lot of heavy clay in your garden, the compost helps to aerate and loosen that heavy clay soil. And it also suppresses airborne plant pathogens or diseases. Compost is not a fertilizer, but it does contain plant nutrients. Nitrogen, phosphorus are mostly in organic forms, and they're released slowly to the plants. Plus, it does not leach the nutrients from the topsoil. That's one of the things that I think people really don't know, and that is that the mulch that is often laid down in the spring and sometimes the fall, even if it's highly shredded, will leach nitrogen from the topsoil because it is in the process of decomposing. With compost, the decomposing has already happened, and those nutrients are in the material and actually get leached back into the topsoil. So if you're going to mulch, the best, and there's no two ways about it, in my book, the only way to mulch is to use compost. Compost is available directly from the township. Actually, there are
leaf mulch.
Yes.
Yes.
And you may want to add some of that to your compost at home. Actually, that would, if you have grass clippings and green material, that will actually help to get more nitrogen into the compost.
So Diana, you're saying you can use, compost, what I've heard is studies have been done as far as keeping down weeds and all of that. Compost is actually the best mulch to use for your garden, as
Right.
opposed to
You really
the
don't want
triple
to
shredded
have
bark mulch and the licorice mulch and all of those that people
yes.
use.
Yes, they actually, the compost looks as good as some of the shredded mulches
Yeah,
as well.
might be a money-saving issue for the township in the future.
Good point.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify on the township, the leaf
Yes.
mulch, that is compost?
It's composted leaf mulch, but it is only from leaves. It's not.
It has little green material.
It
I
has
think
little green material, which means that it's more acidic. And what you could do is adjust it with lime.
you have to be a little careful
but-
with adding lime.
Yeah, and that is the great thing. Compost, you never have to be careful about.
Not too-
You can't apply compost at the wrong time. Whereas a lot of other plant things, I was supposed to put the acetone on in the beginning of the spring, not in the summer. Compost, there's not a bad time to add compost to your soil.
No, there really isn't. You
Right.
do have to be a little careful. Some manures, for example, can be what is considered hot or a little too raw for putting directly on plants. Some of this is done by learning.
And I think what you're saying about that with manure, you're never supposed to use fresh manure. It's supposed to be at least a
Exactly.
year
And,
old. Yeah. And certainly not,
At home, though, when you're developing your compost, you're mixing it all
Let's not
together.
get too green.
You want to mix it all together.
Yeah.
At home with garden clippings, kitchen scraps can even be used, grass clippings, but also there's a list here, used potting soils that you've used, if you've purchased potting soil for particular pots, that can then be turned into, at the end of the season, turned into the compost. Manure can be turned in, sawdust, and hair. And that's one of the things I think a lot of us experience in the spring with our pets when we're during the shedding period, combing out all that hair. That can go right into the compost.
Can lint from the dryer go in the compost?
Yes.
You can collect your
Well,
lint from the dryer and put it in there.
In most, again, you may get some things, I don't actually know. As long as it's cotton, I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, if it's looking funky.
Right. There are things to avoid in composting: oil, fat, grease, meat, those, and fish and dairy products, and even unwashed eggshells. They suggest you rinse the albumin out of the eggshell before putting it into the compost because they can attract pests.
So is that meat as differentiated from chicken, or is
No,
that
animal.
all
That's
kind of
all,
animals?
all meats, yeah. There is one area that's a little gray, but I don't know if a new composter would really want to get into this, but fish can go in. It is not suggested, but it's probably less of a problem than the meats or dairy products. You want to be careful in adding some green material that could spread. And in this area, we really have to worry about Johnson grass and thistle. If the compost does not get hot enough to kill those additives, in most cases, the compost does kill things that you don't want to recreate in your garden. But Johnson weed and thistle in this area are two things that we really don't want to add because it can.
What does the Johnson weed look like?
I think if you go to the web, you can probably pull it up and see. I don't have a picture of it.
The other thing I think in our township is that lesser celandine, those little yellow flowers that have corms that show up all
the
over
marsh
the township.
marigolds?
The marsh marigold. That really,
I think those would probably die out in a hot compost.
in a sufficiently hot, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
and it's like, yeah, that's where it gets a little gray. The other things to avoid are cat and dog waste. You'd want to put your pickups into the compost. And then if you have plants that are particularly inundated with disease, those should not go in, although I have heard that the compost in most cases does get hot enough to kill most disease plants. It is suggested here that lime not be added because it could cause ammonia buildup in the compost. Things tend to be pretty acidic in our area anyway, so lime would just raise that pH, I think. Wood ash added sparingly to the pile from your fireplace, or if you burn oak on the grill, that wood can go into the compost. That wood ash can go into the compost. It adds potash is the nutrient. Marty Moscowane, I don't know. She has a program called Radio Times on WHYY. She interviewed Jenny Rose Carey, who is at Temple Ambler campus, and Jenny Rose Carey recommends sprinkling wood ash around peonies and some. You might be able to pick up that program as it aired earlier this week. You might be able to pick it up and find out more about composting. She ran a program on composting. Had some call-in questions. Now, where if you're going to start a compost, would you put it? And here are some suggestions for that. Shaded area will help prevent drying out in the summer and also be a more comfortable place to work while you're out there turning the compost and adding or taking from it. Avoid areas that will interfere with lawn and garden activities. You need an adequate area around the compost so you can get in and turn it and add to it. Also, you may want to allow for area to have a holding area. Let's say you have a lot of grass clippings that if you put them in the compost, it would be too much nitrogen. You need more brown, so you'd want to put them in a holding area until you can add some brown to the compost. So it's handy to have an area just to kind of hold things. And then also an area to put the finished compost so that you can draw from it and have an active area going at the same time. And it's also convenient to have water nearby. It's also important for good drainage, to have good drainage around it, keep it away from any wells. And it is handy to have the compost easily available and be considerate of your neighbors. Compost is very seldom odoriferous. If it does become that way, adding oxygen, turning it, will help it to aerate and eliminate the odor. On the website, I believe tomorrow it will be available. You can go to the website, the Radnor website, and at the EAC designation, there should be information that can be downloaded, and I included some directions for constructing compost bins. So that may be available. It even has a materials list. That may be available for you tomorrow.
Whatever you have to post, just let us know and we'll get it up there tomorrow.
I think Heather has it, so it should be available, I think, tomorrow.
And one thing, when you look at like the one that's up on the screen, sometimes they're using those pallets from the hardware stores.
Yes.
And I think they pay to have those removed.
They're happy to give them
they're
away.
probably happy to give one to you. You can either use them for the sides or for the bottoms. You know, they're the packing pallets. I know a couple years ago that was the case, that they were thrilled to give them away. So it can be very inexpensive.
In our area, there are 3 sites that I am aware of. They're called compost parks. And I'm working actually on trying to establish one at the Tredyffrin Library. Longwood Gardens has one, Springton Manor Farm in Glenmore, and the Chester County Solid Waste Authority in Narbonne, PA, all have places where you can go and look at the various possible constructions for compost bins. Usually, a 3x3, as you see here on the screen, 3x3 size cube is a good size. You want to have it manageable so that it can get enough air, and yet it's big enough so that it can create enough heat to actually decompose the material. Anything larger than a 5x5x5 is really difficult to turn. So you might want to start another pile if you have enough material to do so. There are manufactured bins available, especially if you're putting food waste into the compost. Many townships and counties require that those types of facilities have covers to keep out the skunks and raccoons and worse that could possibly get into the compost. I brought along a tool that I thought I'd share with you. If you decide to go with something like the Earth Machine, you can see how narrow the top is on that item. In fact, you can see this tool that I'm going to show you in a minute being used in the bottom photograph on the screen. What this does is, in a small area, it allows you to access that area and aerate the center of the compost, dropping the pole into the compost and then turning it. The 2 levers drop down, and as you raise it up, it disturbs the center of the compost and allows the air to get in.
Can I ask, how much compost do you get out of a machine like this, or a small area like you're suggesting? Is it enough for a small garden? How much do you need and produce in this?
It really does break down to a small amount, and it takes a constant process to keep building it. You can, again, if you want to import material, you can, and then you can always buy compost also, depending on how much you need. But
And I do think part of the, the question is how much of this do you need for your garden? And it produces a small amount, but the other way to look at it is how much of the yard waste and food that our family consumes can be absorbed by my yard. And so the answer to that is that I've heard up to a third of household waste that goes into the waste stream is yard waste. So I think it's more of changing your mind to think, how do I get my yard to absorb everything that we produce? And so what my experience, and tell me if yours is the same, is the manufactured composter, I use that for food scraps, like all through the year. And that way
you have to add the green and the brown too.
And you add the green and the brown, and I'm testimony, you don't have to be that scientific. And you kind of do that until it's full, and you're thinking it's not working, and you're not even stirring it, and then you lift it out, and you're like, wow, it's all compost on the bottom. But that's what I do for the food scraps. And then I have piles hidden around the yard that aren't that scientific, but where I put my shredded leaves in the fall, and then I throw the green in the spring and the summer, and then magically it either becomes nice earth. But I think from my perspective, and as we're looking, and we'll be talking about reducing your waste stream, you're just really trying to figure out how you can not be putting all of this stuff to go somewhere else. Our LEAF program is fabulous in Radnor that it picks that up, but there's always more that shows up after leaf collection day, or you don't live that close to the street, and different things, so that it does reduce that much. With erosion and wind, your yard
It's much better in your yard than it is in the landfill.
Yeah.
Just to give some perspective, the township composts about 10,000 tons of leaves every year, and they get about 3,000 tons of screened composted leaf mulch. And so it goes down by about 30%, but it's a really fine product. And about 6 years ago, I had the leaf compost analyzed by Penn State Agricultural Extension Service, and the pH was about 6.5. It wasn't bad. They don't have to add anything.
Mm-hmm. That's good balanced pH.
But yeah, so these little, if you purchase a composter, that's for your speedy compost that you want for your tomato plants in the next 30 days. But if you're more patient, when you start going nuts and just keep composting everything, you're not always shredding everything down. Although ideally, I do have a neighbor who has a great shredder that he invested in. It shreds everything, and
It has a carbon footprint too, though. It has a carbon footprint.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So.
Well, how do we know when the compost is finished? Compost is mature when the color is a dark brown. It is crumbly, loose, and humus-like. It has an earthy smell. It contains no readily recognizable feedstock, and the pile has shrunk to about a third of its original volume. There's a simple test to find out if, in fact, it's finished. You can bag it in a plastic bag for several days, and it should produce no foul odor. And, of course, there's a germination test also, because seeds will not grow in something that is too acidic or too alkaline. So if a seed will germinate in it, that's a pretty good sign that it's ready to use. We could go on. I think our time limit is a little bit shorter than...
Yeah, that's good. If you can just
Okay.
wrap up, that would be great.
So this is a quick overview, and I hope we've inspired you to look further into this and maybe even go out this weekend and build your compost bin. The local library, I have an assortment of books on the table here that give you an idea of what's available in our library system. Mike McGrath, one of the celebrity gardeners in our area, has written a book on composting. And for those of you who are interested in possibly expanding to indoor composting, there is a book called The Worm Book, which I featured in the center of the table there, that would be a great reference if you want us to begin indoor composting. I'd like to also mention briefly, if I may, just a minute, the Delaware County is offering classes, and you can check with Susan Cordes, recycling coordinator of Delaware County. Her telephone number is 610-892-9620. I think that will also be posted tomorrow on the website. You can give her a call, and she will have information on classes that are being given around the area.
Diana, are these composting classes, or are these something for your, like the master composter thing?
These are composting classes.
General classes.
I think the PRC is offering something, and Penn State Extension.
Yeah, and something to always keep your eye out for, like my bin, a lot of times these composting workshops do provide, a free compost bin with the workshop. So,
True.
which is something to look around, and that's what we're hoping to find someday for rain barrels.
So
but,
I encourage
it's a nice.
I encourage you to take those brown bags away from the curb and put them in your backyard and let them do the best work they can.
And even better, take those plastic bags full of leaves and put them.
But you know what the real question is? What do you do with the bags full of the weeds, full of the thistle? The ones that you don't want to put in your compost.
Put those in the garbage.
That is a good question.
Well, if they're getting incinerated, which our ICLEI study seems to indicate.
Well, I would suggest that maybe making them hotter than what a compost can do. So there may be, actually this might be something to look into for that kind of material, a way to add lime, for example, that would kill it in a hot, very hot, say a trash can, for example, fill it and then add lime onto it. It may not be, the result may not be something that would be directly useful, but you may then be able to turn that into the compost. So that's a good question.
So once it's killed, then you don't need to worry about
Exactly.
the seeds or whatever is left there growing once you place it somewhere else.
That's a good question.
But look that up on the.
I was just going to note, Diana and I had been talking initially about the farmers market and the amount of green waste that is generated on a typical day. And it would be pretty interesting to see what could be done to connect that green waste with the new CSA, because they'll have some space to do some composting. So I think we should continue to talk about that as a great opportunity.
Good.
Absolutely, and that is something with Robin mentioned the CSA, which is the Skunk Hollow Community Farm that's forming down at the Willows, and one hope would be maybe to get we don't want to compete with TE's compost park, but if that didn't turn out or have something like that, they're thinking of doing an education area that might be, especially since it is near Skunk Hollow.
I don't think you can have too many.
Yeah, can't have too many. Good. I didn't know they were competing on compost parks, but that would be certainly something worth looking into. And I will add, and I'll talk about this more at the next meeting, but I did save my our garbage. I have a family of 5. During the winter, I had told Diane about this, and we saved everything for 2 weeks. And without getting into the details, it was about 82 pounds, and 22 pounds of that was food scraps that were composted. And this is in the dead of winter. This is when I'm cheap and I'm not buying tons of fruits and vegetables. I mean, it's not even like with Summer's Bounty. It's not with any kind of yard waste or leaves or anything. That was right after Christmas or January. And so 1/3 of our family's waste was food scraps.
I really do want to encourage you to.
I'm going to get it for Diana. I'm going to go get a little laundry tub, and I'm going to put, worms and sawdust, and my husband is going to pull it. But he's assured me that it's clean and nice. I'm sure it is. But at any rate, even during the dark days of winter, we all just produce a lot more in the way of things that can be composted, and it is a big part of the landfill. And we'll get into that as we talk about costs for the township, and keeping costs down is to keep that in your yard.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
We
Very
really appreciate
interesting.
it.
Thank you.
Okay, We will return to our work group
Regular
reports. Right,
scheduled.
exactly. Regularly scheduled programming. So we had finished the climate protection. Green building is next, although I don't have a particular update. I think that at a future meeting, I'd like to talk a little bit more about ways that we want to promote green building. But because it's getting late, we'll move on to the next report, which is the environmental ordinances. Sloan,
Sure.
can you take a minute to
Yep.
update us on that?
We have continued to have a working group discussion. Brenda, Matt Bauman, Mark Janicek, and I discussed not only the solar panel ordinances that we've been looking at, but also expanding to include other alternative energy ordinances, particularly wind power and geothermal ordinances. We've looked at several of the townships around here. Really, there's not much to speak of in other townships or even at the state level. We've looked at some other states. There's not very much, at least on the East Coast. There's a little bit more on the West Coast, particularly those states where there's a lot of geothermal energy caused by faults and other interesting geographic things that we do not have.
And actually, on that point,
Yeah.
because I know there's been some confusion about this recently, because we do have geothermal out here, but it's often different than what's out west. Out west, they can reach down and access the heat and the energy from magma and things like that. Whereas out here, we have lots of buildings and properties that are using what they call geothermal, but it uses a heat pump technology. It uses the constant 55-degree temperature of the ground as a more efficient way to heat and cool.
Right.
So there's two types, and I know there's been some confusion about that lately, so
Right.
good to clear that up.
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up. And in terms of where we're going, Matt has offered to reach out to the American Planning Association to look for model ordinances, also to look for cases and statutes that might be relevant to this analysis. We're going to reconvene mid-April and continue the discussion and see if we can formulate a recommendation to the EAC, perhaps take it to the township.
I was wondering, do you think ICLEI would be a good source of information?
On that matter, I'm not sure.
Well, I
But
mean,
it's
we
worth
might
a
just
shot.
explore it.
Yeah.
See if they got anything.
And again, I had mentioned Leo Burnaby from the school
Yes,
district.
I have put a call into Leo, and we'll touch base.
Yeah, and an example, what Brenda was Brenda was talking about, excuse me, it's getting late. But Brenda was talking about just an example of how it's used here is Leo Burnaby had said the driveway in the front area of the middle school has the geothermal wells, and what it does is that 55 degrees is just enough to keep ice from forming on the driveways that comes up to the school, so there's no ice for the buses. So it's not volcanically hot, but it's warm enough.
Right. Great, thank you.
If there is a person or a way to reach out to ICLEI.
Right. Yeah, and actually, probably through Matt. I mean, unless do you have the contact person? I forget her name in Boston. Okay, Robin can send that to you.
Okay, that would be terrific. Thank you. And Brenda, you had reached out to Beverly
Right, Beverly Barnes.
Barnes at the Harb and had a good discussion, it sounded like,
Right.
with her in terms of her interest in
Because
what
it's-
we're doing. And
Right. As we work through this, we also wanted to be sensitive to historic preservation issues as well.
Right.
So
And
we're
see-
getting some good input from her.
Right, exactly. So I think that's the latest.
Great, thank you. Next is community environmental education and awareness. Heather?
I don't have a whole lot to add. I would encourage people really to to take some time and spend it with the Radnor.com website. There is a lot of information on there, and I think if you just spend a little time on it, it's easier to find some information and look under residential and government. We are still working on getting a green page to make it even simpler, where you could just click on that and have links to things for Parks and Rec and all of that. And as I understand, any of the township meetings, which right now are shown on Comcast 10, no, Radnor 10, which is Comcast, and then Channel 30, which is for Verizon, which is when you can see, for example, this meeting until 4 o'clock the next day. You can now get these off of the web through your computer and watch them when you want to, and you can watch just the section of the meeting you want, which I think is going to make them very useful. So I'm just waiting to hear back from Melissa, and hopefully we'll get that green web page up. And
Oh, great, so she's got the outline already?
Yes.
Excellent, very
yeah,
good.
So.
Okay, good. Okay, the next item was the sustainability series, but I think we've already covered that. There may be a date change, but the program topic will be alternative energy, and there will be speakers there on wind energy, on solar energy, on talking about geothermal, I think nuclear as well, and Robin's,
efficiency.
yeah, right. And Robin's suggestion was energy efficiency, which I think everybody agrees these days is really ought to be our first step to become more energy efficient as we explore some of these renewables. So thank you for that, Robin. Okay. And was there anything other that came out of the meeting, the recent planning meeting? Anything else that we had to mention?
No, the only thing is, this next program is really going to be talking about policy choices, and so not specifically focused on what the individual homeowner can do, but more about, where we need to go with our energy use in a macro way, and then the subsequent series will be more focused on the individual homeowner and their choices and energy efficiency in the house and conservation options.
Great, thank you. Okay, is there any old business that we haven't covered?
If I can just, I had spoken with Paul Basic in the Public Works, and I just wanted to reiterate with this yard waste that they're picking up, because it also brings up, just in general, just to really keep them to 3 to 4 feet in length, a foot in diameter. You can put
Those
them
are
in
your
paper
Tide
bags.
bundles.
Yes, your Tide bundles. If you do put them in a can, make it very clear that that is yard waste to be picked up for that. And also, he did say with the recycling, just your regular recycling, ideally if you could put the paper in bags next to the can, if you can break down those boxes, really would help. There are new cans available if you need them. No styrofoam. He repeats no styrofoam in the recycling. Especially I think a lot of people put boxes and forget their styrofoam in there. And also, lastly, yes, if you could clean out your recycle cans every once in a while. Which I know we're guilty of, just kind of never really looking down.
It's a good reminder.
Yeah, so.
Okay, great, thank you. Anything else? Any new business? No? Okay, great. Then we have an opportunity for public participation. Jenny, did you say you had an announcement? Come on up to the microphone and, yes, very patiently, and just state your name and where you live.
Yeah.
That's fine.
My name is Jennifer Grasso. I am a senior political philosophy and environmental studies major at Villanova University. I'm here today to announce an event that the Villanova students are planning in conjunction with the Sierra Club. The event has to do with local legislation that was proposed by Delaware County's Representative Greg Vitale. The legislation does have plans to increase the renewable energy by Pennsylvania by 2026, but unfortunately the second half of the bill proposes that Pennsylvania implement a carbon capture and sequestration program. These programs have yet to become commercially viable. They're not proven and they're not cost efficient. So these areas of concern concerning the uncertainty and concerning the liability by the state of Pennsylvania, are a serious issue for organizations such as the Sierra Club and Penn Environment and the Clean Air Council and the Clean Water Action, who have all spoken up about their opposition to the bill. At the event, we will have scholarly speakers by the Villanova faculty, as well as a representative from the Sierra Club. We'll have a short video on coal, and we will also be asking for student contributions. So basically what I'm announcing is that we encourage you to attend this event and to come together, to bring together the faculty of Villanova, the students of Villanova, as well as, and importantly, the residents of Delaware County. So
Jenny,
that's
when is the
When
event?
and where?
the event, important part, is it will actually be on Earth Day, April 22nd. It'll be held in the Villanova Connolly Center, the cinema, from 6:30 to 7:30, from 6 to 7:30, I'm sorry. And it's in conjunction with the rest of the Earth Day events that are being planned through Villanova. We have a number of student speakers and keynote speakers and videos that will be going on throughout the day on campus. So that's it.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Where did you say it is at Villanova? At the
The
conference
Connolly
center?
Center.
Connolly Center. Okay.
It'll be in the cinema.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other public participation? No? Okay, great, thank you. We have a motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
Seconded.
Carried, thank you. Good night.